Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us again on the Higher Ground podcast. Today, joining me is Sage Gibbons, my son's friend and drummer for his band, data scientist. And we're going to get into the details of our conversation today. But this is another example of how we want to connect with people at all different levels of their careers. And Sage came to me asking for some advice. You might even say sage advice. I'm sorry, Sage, that was terrible. Anyway, whether you're preparing for an interview, seeking a promotion, or just curious about what's in the minds of hiring managers, executives, or interview candidates, this podcast might be for you. Join us as we explore real career journeys, one story at a time. And if you do like the show, feel free to like, subscribe, whatever your preference. Thanks for watching. And just remember that the views expressed here on the Higher Ground podcast are the personal opinions of our guest and me, Tom Castriota, your host, and do not represent those of their employers, past or present. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Higher Ground. Today we'll be talking with Sage Gibbons. Sage, would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Great to be here, Tom. I am a technology manager, data scientist, and applied quantitative researcher. I've spent time both in academic research environments, nonprofits, as well as marketing consulting, and basically doing anything and everything with data and analytics and modeling, basically to explore how to tell stories and deliver insights for all parts of business and outreach and research, all that good stuff.
Awesome. I like I like to tell stories part. I can't tell you how many times I've been in meetings and presentations and whatnot. And it's just data, and it's like there's a story in there. If you can't tell it, um, you're gonna lose out essentially. So, tell me about what it is you're looking to do. Like, I usually would like to understand, like, what do you like when I'm thinking about my own career or coaching someone or just talking, like, what are you sort of three dimensions? Like, what are you good at? What do you love to do? And then, the third piece is what, is the economics, right? Like, where are you in your career? What kind of money are you looking for? If the first two things are firing, the third one is less important unless you're trying to feed a family or buy a house, which, who isn't, right? So I don't want to pretend that the economic side of it's not important, but there's like the analogy I give is like you might be the best, you might be the best painter in the world, but if nobody wants your art, the market's not going to draw, you're not going to get compensated for it. Or vice versa. You might be the best, but you hate the work. You can
Yeah.
make a ton of money and hate it. That's you're not optimizing for what you're good at. So anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's like reminds me of Ikigai. You know that one?
No.
And this is probably 8 levels watered down. So, but it's a Japanese concept or word, and like the way I've heard that put is, the Ikigai is, that kind of enlightened purpose. It's the intersection of what you're good at, um, what you love, and what the world needs. So I think that's pretty much what you're saying.
Interesting. Interesting. I'd heard it framed in a Jesuit sense
Yeah.
in a similar way. So I guess there's a deeper root than my interview tactics.
Yeah. Well, so
Interesting.
I've that's a good place to start because I think my kind of just career journey and just how I approach work and just what I put my time and energy into in general, I've used that as a lens without even
Mm.
necessarily. I only learned that concept a year ago or so, but um, I have always been interested in making an impact. And I did my undergraduate in environmental science and biology, and started there as to say, what's going on in the world. So sustainability, environmental science. This is something that I really do care about. The world needs this,
Yes, absolutely.
and how do I get good at it? But I also quickly found, just from the limitations of an undergraduate degree, but also just the reality that I think the world doesn't really know how to value, especially 10 years ago, as more around sustainability and things, it ended up just being um, pretty niche, or kind of like, corporate responsibility, sort of
Yeah,
just like
yeah,
the very end of a whole process. And so I also found myself saying, like, both in terms of like the science of things and just the actual like data, like I have a really good understanding of the problem,
yeah. Mm,
but I don't really know what I actually could contribute if I was really working on these things, and what would that look like.
yeah.
So
Like, how do you
after
fit into a big
graduating,
project, or how do
yeah,
what's your contribution on something that might be large scale, or yeah,
yeah, just like what are like I just had a I was like, I think I really I get the big picture. I understand, like, but I don't really know what are the particular kind of skills that are really needed, and what I would get into. The most that I was exposed to had more to do with like policy and that kind of thing.
yeah.
um so then I, after undergrad, uh went to get my master's in urban informatics at Northeastern University in Boston.
I am familiar with that. I am familiar with that university, having sent one of my prodigy there.
Yeah, yeah, I know. um and actually lived right around that area in Jamaica Plain. But yeah, so that was my intent. My intention there was like, I want to learn how to work with data
Mm,
science, analytics. I just want to like have that skill. And so that was a really great experience. And I, learned how to code in R. And, we were working in the research lab I was working in, and the whole program was all focused on studying the city of Boston
mm,
itself. And so we would scrape and gather huge amounts of data, big data, from administrative records, like property investments, economic developments, 911 records, 311 records. I mean, any kind of government administrative data set, as well as online stuff like Yelp, Airbnb, Twitter.
wow,
So it ends up being, you could have, like, looking at like a decade of data across all these data sets that are all connected to each other because they relate in space and time to
sure,
the same city. So
yeah,
you could
yeah,
ask all kinds of questions, looking at things like um, the differences between neighborhoods in terms of economic development. So I really got my hands, dirty, basically, with all of that.
What was the duration of this, the time of the data? How long?
I mean, everything, I would say, especially the administrative data sets, would stretch back 10 years or more.
Oh wow, oh, so really, some of the data is very historical.
Yeah. And
Interesting.
then, more of the online sources from like social media and things like Airbnb were obviously a little bit more recent,
Sure.
and more, high volume as well. But yeah, between those two things, so one of the, just as an example, just
Hmm.
of like what that kind of gave me the sense of like, all right, where there's data, there's a story. Where there's data, you can, um, you there's some kind of information there to explore. And and because we had so much, it was sort of like any question you could really think of, you're like, sure, there's something in here.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
which was actually an interesting thing to have done in that kind of like university research environment, because so
Sure.
many, uh, typically it's kind of goes the other way, where you think of the question, then you say, we got to go get the data.
Yep.
Hopefully that was enough to answer the question. In this case, you're like, all right, we already have everything. So like one of the things we did was working with IARPA, which is a intelligence activities research project, something like that, within it's like a special research activities within the Department of Intelligence. And they had, during like the height of the COVID pandemic, they had um, given us a grant to try to develop predictive models around COVID spread.
Spread. Sure.
And so they were like, we have everyone's getting all the infection data. We had the, census tract, like the smallest geographic scale. So everyone has all of that. But like, with all the other data you guys have, is there anything you're seeing that could help predict when some of these outbreaks are happening?
Hmm.
So we were kind of like on a little task force team. A few of us were working on different directions. And I had the idea, just thinking, I was like, well, I mean, what is really causing this spread? How does a disease go from one person to the other? And I'm like, if people aren't near each other, they have to gather, right? Like that was,
Yeah.
especially under the in like the height of, the lockdowns and stuff, like gathering was like, you just like simply, nobody should be gathering. Nobody should be throwing parties or anything like that. So looking at, first I looked at the 311 data, which some people might not know, which is like an app and a phone number you can call. It's in New York, Boston, started in Baltimore, I think.
Huh.
And basically it's to report non-emergencies,
Okay. Yeah.
potholes, garbage on the street, whatever.
I
So
think
at
it's
first I was looking at that. Then I realized let's go further, and I looked at 911 data for noise complaints and like disturbances,
sure.
indicating people are having a party or getting together, something's going on, right?
Yep.
Enough that somebody is like, I need to actually call
Well,
911.
yeah, yeah.
So it turns out that worked really well and was able to uh, function as a predictive indicator of COVID spread the next week and 2 weeks later. So you could see across all of the areas. And one of the things that was really interesting was realizing that like it's a pretty intense act to call 911 on your neighbors,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
know? So
Yeah.
you had to kind of factor in the fact that the places and people who do it, most people would only call one time, like it's just like I have to do it. I'm just going to make the call. That was the vast majority, but a small handful of people would call. There was one person who called maybe 80 times over a couple years.
They're
you know,
like they got the trigger finger
yeah.
for 911.
So they're calling like a few times every month. Like it's crazy. So like there's this other dynamic of like how all this naturally occurring data reflects both
Sure.
the
Almost like
person,
background
like,
noise at some level, right? It's like
yeah.
well, not I wouldn't know that you call it a false positive, but kind of.
Yeah, it is. It is. And in some ways, especially in that sense, is you have to like always consider like what is the source of the data and like that kind of whole validation process. Like you don't want to just take it as like just because someone's calling 911 doesn't necessarily mean there was some gathering. It might just be like their neighbor
Right.
plays music loud or something.
Yep, yep, yep.
So,
Yeah.
that was all just part of like this sense of possibility really from what you could do with no one's collecting any of this for any purpose like this. It was just like an opportunity. So I've, really enjoyed that.
So it's interesting. So a couple of questions right out of the gate, right? So first, this is what academia does so well, or sometimes like an academic pursuit, right? This was done to have a data store for the purpose of having the data store. Like the mission was gather data about the city of Boston, which is like so incredibly valuable as an asset that a company wouldn't necessarily do, right? Like without a mission in mind. Like you would do it with the intention of maybe maybe real estate development or I can imagine a number of commercial uses that could potentially come out of this. So this is like kudos to the to the public sector for doing things like that, whether it's city agencies or schools or whatnot.
Yeah.
Um, but I guess my question for you really was like, so in the whole process, right? There's the gathering of the data, there's organizing it, right? There's getting it into structures, there's getting it, whatever kind of API you used on top of it, or user experience, if there was even a user experience, right? Like if it's just data analysts, you need to write, R queries or SQL or whatever, right? Or you're writing code, whatever the case may be. But that immediately limits your audience. But anyway, that's an aside, right? So there's organizing it, there's access, and then there's utilization. There's the queries, there's the analysis, there's things you did, and then which typically would lend to getting more data, maybe generating data and putting it back in the store. What did you enjoy the most in that like life cycle, if you would? Like what was your favorite part?
I think my favorite part is both the beginning and the end, honestly. Like the beginning in that sense of just like you're looking at some massive table of 911 calls. You going through the code trying to figure out which ones relate to like gatherings, parties, trying to say like, and just like that kind of that exploration and just sort of because there's in there, there's information in there. It's just like
Sure.
how can I make sense of it? So I felt I like really took away what's possible there. But what was interesting about this project is it's like the whole contract was like it needs to be predictive. Like we actually need a predictive model. Like
Right.
we can't just like come up with a story and it's like an interesting thing, but like can this tell us something we don't already know from
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
raw infections data? And so then we would prepare every couple of weeks basically a report on how things were going, and trying to, and sharing with them the scripts. This was supposed to be technology for them to now use.
Mm,
Um, and so like having that, kind of like hard goal, and then actually meeting it as a team, and saying like, we have learned something. This is now, a novel technology you can use. This is
yep.
something that can help our responses and predictions. And so I really enjoyed like distilling all of that work down into, here's the model, and this is what it tells us. This is how
Mm,
much more predictive power we had than before.
mm.
And, um, and seeing where that would lead.
Yeah, yeah. No, that sounds exciting. Honestly, like it's particularly doing like good like that for again during like that kind of during the pandemic. It's obviously something that is inherently good for society to do and to share and to have. In our proverbial toolkit, right? And I really like the novel approach, like being like, okay, like how do we detect, um, you know, uh, illegal gatherings, we'll call them, right? And using
Yeah,
that
right.
one data. Did you ever get to this a place where the system itself was able to make recommendations, like pattern matching across time, being like, oh, and also it was full moon or bad weather
Yeah, yeah.
or good weather or whatever?
Yeah, that was part of one of the approaches we took. Like in addition to some of these more kind of focused, models, like the one I was working on, we also had a sort of, kind of full machine learning. Like here's all the features. Let's try to iterate and just see does anything, because that's also part of it. Because we just actually, a huge value was just the amount of data we had,
Sure.
and the possibility of saying, look, there's all kinds of things that, especially when you're just talking about raw prediction, not necessarily building like a causal model that makes sense, like the one that I made, which is like,
In a
okay,
context, yeah.
right. But then you're like, okay, it's summer, it's, the weather went up this much, people are outside, there's all these things, like there's a million and one things that could
Sure.
bring people together and do that. So yeah, that was part of it too. And I would, if it was in a different context, I think we would have been able to go all the way to like a dashboard or a product that
Sure.
others would use. In this case, they only needed like our scripts and proof of concept, and then they would take it from there. So
Interesting.
we didn't get that far, but
Yeah, maybe they did, but yeah,
yeah.
that's great. So what's it been like? So now your gig ended. You've got the degree, you've got the experience. What's it like? I kind of know the answer to this question, but like, what's it like out there, Sage?
Well,
Well,
luckily
maybe
I got to
like
defer that for a couple years
mm,
before I got into it. So I graduated from the master's, completed that in 2022.
okay.
And then I hopped into a role as a strategic technology manager and researcher for a nonprofit company, Pro Social World, which was actually started by a professor I had at Binghamton.
Hmm,
So I kind of skirted right from the beginning and I was sort of already contracting with them a little bit, and then they were able to bring me on.
that's awesome.
So now is
Another great university in the family, by the way.
so now is really like the first time where I'm, you know, totally like opening across the field as far as like what's out there.
Hmm,
And so I could tell you about my experience at Pro Social World too, but yeah, I mean, coming to the present day, it's definitely a um especially now. I mean, I can't even, I don't even know, I have no perspective on beyond right after like undergrad, a long
hmm.
time ago now, of applying in a world where everybody's using an AI. You're using an AI, they're using an AI, we're using AIs to read AIs, and it's like
Do you mean as
the
part of
whole,
like, the recruiting process? Is that what you mean, or
yeah, just the whole applications and everything. And I mean, like at some level, you look at like just the numbers game and like the volume. You're just trying to like sift through things. You go on LinkedIn Premium, it's recommending jobs to you through AI. It's helping you decide. You write,
oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
you're helping, you're using that to help diagnose what they're looking for. You're trying to write your resume and tweak it based on the thing. So it's like then you get sent to their side, and they're using also filtering with that. And so it's like
Interesting.
um I found basically after probably sending out, I think in the past 4 months are around, at different rates of effort, but like 200, let's say, applications.
Wow.
that that just doesn't get any traction when you're just sending it out there. I mean, like there's some chance that you kind of do it, but then I've really shifted my strategy much more to just looking at my network, seeing
Yeah,
who's a friend of a friend, and um, not only just because obviously it's great to get a referral and that,
sure.
but when I actually get to talk to somebody about the company they work with, through an introduction or however, and
Yeah,
I can just talk about it. It doesn't matter if they have nothing to do with the hiring team or even necessarily on that team, just to get that perspective. The job, the job role that I might see, I actually can understand it, and you
sure.
realize like the notes I have, and I look at the job, I'm like, I never would have made realized that this was actually what this was about.
Yeah, the work not matching the role profile. Yeah,
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 there's just too much that they're not putting in there, and then like and so then I've been able to put together much more focused applications, and those have definitely had a better impact. And search is still on, but it's it's really it's definitely a puzzle.
yeah, yeah. I do think the strategy. I think first one thing I always recommend is if you've got like talking to like friend network, and like you and I can talk offline about maybe some picking some, well, we should talk about it, but it's like some suitable companies. If I know somebody, I'll certainly help. um but the other strategy is like recruiters, and recruiters have can help if you find the right one. I mean, they don't always have the best reputation, but if you know somebody, or like I've got a very good friend who I would recommend to anybody in a second. But again, that's one person in one organization when there's there's either a lot of jobs or a lot of noise. I will say
Yeah.
though, to comment on your AI comment, I played with that for a while. I was looking at a position, um, and it was for an AI company. I was using AI to customize my resume for the role on an AI team,
Yeah.
and then went back and asked the AI that I was working with to refine my resume for an AI chatbot was reviewing
Wow.
my
I haven't
resume.
gone that far.
It was so meta. It was like, wait, am I like am I on Earth right now? Just I've gone
Yeah.
so many layers of abstraction away from like. But what's funny, because a lot of the feedback was good. It was like you're the job says you need X, and you've got gaps here. I was like, okay, it hurts, but it was good.
Yeah.
You
So
know,
actually, let me say a little story about that. As part
yeah,
of those 200 applications, I was like, all right, I'm using ChatGPT and things like that all the time. Just, help me with little things, and how can I, there's a certain, like I always think of those as best for like the blank page, getting past the initial, blank
sure,
page kind of thing,
yeah.
especially if you have like
In the
templates and
outline,
things.
or yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So the flow I've developed, I made my own um, GPT, which you can just make. It's just like you just add custom instructions on ChatGPT, and you can do this just in any conversation with like an LLM. But I have had a running thread, so the whole conversation it knows every single job I've applied to, and
which is great. Like
um,
having that history is huge.
yeah, because I'm like, what did I say about that one thing I said? And it's like, just helps me remember how I said it and different ways I've said it, because you start to get foggy on, kind of saying similar things a lot. So the flow I have now, and actually I want to ask you about recruiters after this, but I found a random LinkedIn post that was just kind of giving some advice around preparing resumes and things. And one thing that I took away from it was the advice to um, read the application, read the job description rather, and try to identify the sort of like job functions, like the things that they value. And then rather than like the specific things they want you to do or stuff like just like what do they really value? Things like extra communication,
Mm.
really super organized, extreme, like really good at analytics, whatever it is. Just like those high level, like these are what I'm good at. And then think in general across your experience, like what have I done um where I've done that, and how, and importantly, like how do I know that what I did was good? Like that kind of results
The
focused
outcome based, yeah, yeah,
resume, yeah, outcome based. But really like stepping back and thinking that helped me think across all of my experiences,
Mm,
even smaller, like I've done marketing
that's really
contract
good.
jobs and things like that, and say like, all right, I actually can think of like one or two things from each of these, and they're all good representation of like, rigorous analysis
Sure.
or things like that. And I'm
Good
like,
communication or presentation skills, or yeah.
yeah, exactly. So now I can kind of, and so then what I did was I created like, rather than tweaking my resume and over again, um, I had like sort of a master reference where each section was those high functional areas like excellent communication. And
Interesting.
then underneath was every example that I results outcome based and super clean, and I could always just use that describes it perfectly.
It's
But
like
I
you're.
would, yeah, I would pull it around, but I would what this helped me do was realize that the same experience can be framed in terms of a different thing that it shows, because that's true. Some it's more
Sure.
than one. Some things it's more about communication, more about project management. So help me tell the story about different things I've done in ways that focus on that rather than trying to like tweak the
Mm,
same language. And so that has really helped me like quickly put together a resume that I feel like it's authentic,
mm.
and but it also represents more of like that high level what we're really trying to go for, rather than they said Tableau, so I make sure I put Tableau and like all these little things. Like, yeah, those things matter too, but like, what was the point of this part again? So it helps
Yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
That's great. Honestly, like, and it keeps you grounded in terms of like your, your collection of experiences and matching this particular set of skills to. I think that's a phenomenal. Like, I know some recruiters love to get their hands on your methodology.
yeah. Well, yeah, it's sort of been
It
this
works on both
evolving
sides.
process.
Yeah, no, it could easily work on both sides. I think that's that. I mean, that's deep. Like, honestly, that's really good.
I
Uh,
only got there recently. Let me tell you, it's been a lot of brute force, and that eventually I was like,
yeah,
I'm getting too caught up in just like these like micro edits, and I feel like I end up wordsmithing the same thing over and over and over again. And I'm like, I don't even remember
yeah, the
why I
aspect.
wrote this.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
No, I think that's I yeah, and I know it doesn't, like, the resume is one document that I can tell you for sure. Staring at is you get blind to it. Like, yeah,
yeah,
what did I say? What did I do? Oh my gosh, yeah, it's you can only stare at a thing so much, and it's like
yeah,
then the words just start moving around. Um,
exactly.
no, I think that's an interesting, So what's the hit rate been though? I mean, like, in some level, like, sort of, there's two different mindsets around this, right? There, one is it's a numbers game. Just flood the flood the zone. Just put out whatever you can. Another would be take a more focused, targeted approach towards a set of companies I care about. Right,
Yeah,
I'm aligned. My values are aligned with, or my it's in a sector I like, or it's whatnot, or maybe I have contacts there. Like, I'm kind of curious where you are in your journey and which one you value more. Is like, hey man, I need a job, right? Because they're different. There's different strategies. There's I happen to know your age just because of my our relationship, right? Friends with my son, but there's a different line between I want to get the job, because I'm
yeah.
still looking for that one, just for the record. But where the line is between I got to get something to pay to pay the rent, versus I can be a little more picky, or I can do some freelance work until I find the right
Yeah.
thing. Like, where are you on that spectrum?
So I would say, kind of back to that origin story, the ikigai thing, and what's like the thing is, um, that's taken me to where I have been, and in my current role, with the nonprofit, I've really, especially because of it being its own startup and my relationship with the founder, um, you know, I've got to kind of flex my wings. I've been, presented our whole brand at conferences. I've
Well,
networked. We've built a custom research application. I've helped get contracts for partnerships and revenue that, it was we just were a small team. So like if
really,
someone could, so I've really felt like I've from all of that experience and like kind of getting to experience more of a senior leadership role relative to my experience, just because I've actually been working with the professor, the founder, for a long time. So I really am I know what it's all about kind of thing.
Yeah. You're deep in it, right? And especially
Yeah.
with a small team, like you're like, okay, today you need to learn sales.
Yeah. So that's helped me a lot with kind of separating the particular job and sort of like what's the project, what's the work you're on to your more own like lifelong thing. And I feel like from some of the side projects, some of the people I know, stuff they're working on, I feel like just myself am
Yeah,
connected to, like, I'll be able to create those own opportunities more because I've had those relationships and that experience. And so at this point, I'm really more like, not like I just need a job, but I'm really more like I want to work at a place that that allows me to kind of like flex my full skills, all the analytic stuff and kind of project management that I've been doing at a larger scale, and a place that maybe has more of um, an existing kind of culture and like teams I can work with. That's not so much that startup, because I feel like I've been able to carve my own identity and like what I want to work on and who I know and stuff like that on the side, and those could maybe become the main thing if anything takes off.
yeah,
But at this point, it's like I actually want to plug in more to what's already out there, and so I'm very open, I think, ultimately to um, anything. And as far as like your question around what is, yeah, like putting out hundreds of applications or being more strategic. I think that's where I started. In the fall, that's what I was kind of just like kind of shooting for anything, everything, maybe trying to be selective, but um, then took a little break over the holidays, and it's not a great time to put in applications anyway.
it's
So
exhausting and it's depressing because you're like,
yeah,
okay, is anybody gonna call me back?
no. So I just
Answer
said,
is
let's not
no.
even.
Yeah, answer is no.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So now
it's
and
not
then
personal.
yeah, exactly. And I was like, I don't even want. I just need to like refresh. And
Yeah, that's healthy.
since then, I've really just pivoted. Not that I won't throw out a cold application here or there, and I certainly do, but really, I'm just using LinkedIn to triangulate. And I want to find if there's a. I want to find the person I know in relation to the job, even if it's someone I know, like someone
Yeah,
kind
friend
of
of a
distant.
friend. Or, yeah, yep.
But there has to be someone I can actually talk to and figure out, because if I'm just looking at this job description and then trying to guess what they actually do and mean and like do something that's quality, it's not going to really be a good use of anyone's time. I'm not even going to really represent what I want to. And like, not for nothing, also I don't know how anyone breaks through without some kind of referral, or even if you don't need a referral, but you got to talk to somebody in some way. I mean, like these
Yeah,
cold
yeah, no,
applications, it's like it's
yeah. At
brutal.
the end of the day, you need to get to a human.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think so I've heard a lot. So like I'm just gonna play back what I heard and just give you a little bit of feedback, right? So you're in a good and bad situation in the sense of you're in a position where you've done a little bit of everything, which is awesome, right? Um and you didn't this is not your fault. Like you didn't say I want to be a software engineer or I want to be a data analyst or I want to be a program manager. You said I like a little bit of everything, right? And I don't know if that's reflecting in your CV or not. But when you're going for work in a startup, that's okay, right? Because you're the
right,
jack of all trades. You're gonna like, or in a like you're in like in an organization you're now, where it's a very small team. That's a huge asset, and that's how you sell yourself to that organization.
right,
But if you're looking for like a big company, like a bank or like a tech company, or you're looking at a larger institution, they may not know what to do with you, right? In the
right,
sense of you've done all these things, right? But I'm hiring a program manager or I'm hiring a technical program manager. They're very different animals, right? Or I'm hiring a software engineer or an analyst, right? And the generally speaking, the larger companies will stick to that role profile, right? Like I get your point about the nuance of the job, but if you're
hmm
interviewing for a job that's like a program manager or product manager, generally speaking, that's a well-established, well-defined role. I say generally because from one company to the next, there's variation. But like
yeah,
a program manager will be running projects, right? That's what
right,
they do. The technical program manager is that's what I am right now, and I'm a bit of a high, like I'm a more senior person in that role. So I'm also like a subject matter expert on a particular, on domain like risk and compliance. but also like I know enough and I know enough about infrastructure and architecture to be annoying to engineers or helpful depending on how who you talk to. But the idea is that like in that capacity, that's part of my expectation, right? Whereas with a pure program manager, just get the job done, execute it. It's very helpful if you know software projects or finance projects or compliance, etc.
Yeah.
It's not a hard requirement, but I'm of the school where if you've got the background in X thing, and that thing could be technical skill like machine learning or data analysis or whatnot, or a subject domain like equities or compliance or whatever, even as a program manager, you can add value because you know the lingo, you know the context, you know enough that we're like, what does that acronym mean again? You're not constantly like learning for that stretch,
Yeah.
because program managers too will rotate in projects. Sometimes they might run for
Hmm.
quarters or two, and then you're like off to the next thing. So that expertise is helpful, but that's a very well classified job specification, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I think it's harder to get a very technical job like a software engineer. Sweet jobs are hard if you don't have a comp sci degree and a master's in that space.
Yeah.
Now, like
Absolutely.
data analysis and machine, like a lot of that. What was your master's actually in?
It's called urban informatics, but it's basically data science.
Yeah. So like the thing is, I think one of your early on questions needs to be sort of how do you attack the market? How do you attack those? If you haven't already done this, if you have, I can stop. But like I would slice it into two buckets of candidate companies. I still like
Hmm.
your strategy of doing the LinkedIn thing. The networking is key. Finding like the friend of a friend is always good, right?
Yeah.
And at this stage of your career, networking should be a quarter of your job. Because
Yeah.
the more
100%.
people you meet, the more people like we should be connected. I hope.
Yeah. No, I mean it's crazy. Like, and that's the thing with LinkedIn and just in general, any just like the actual amount of people you know is much bigger than what you could possibly remember off the top of your head.
Oh yeah, no,
And so, and you're net, and as much as you're like, you talk to somebody and say, oh, do you know anyone or anything? It's like they actually do, but they don't know that they know. They have to go on LinkedIn
exactly.
themselves and
Yeah,
figure it
no,
out.
that's exactly right. Like my buddy over here might have experience with such and such, and just I would have no idea if he knows. You should know that, right?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, the LinkedIn, like the graph is such an incredibly helpful tool. Like back, again, the gray hair, but like back in the day, what we would do is literally you literally put a stamp, on an envelope and mail it cold, and the resume mattered, because it had a moment to get out of the pile, and honestly, it's very rare that even worked. It was
Yeah.
still finding recruiters, again, recruiters played a much bigger role. I
Right.
don't know what the recruiting landscape is now because frankly, I don't even know how many jobs, maybe the last probably 20 years have been without recruiting. I mean, I've talked to recruiters, I've gone on interviews, I've done that, but every job in the last probably 20 years of work has been through my network and people I've
Right.
either worked with and went somewhere, you should come over, or well, hey, that, is the grass really greener on that side of the fence? Um, and rarely is it, for the record. But but I will say so sort of bifurcate the two. The other one, I know your generation, and I really respect this a lot. I've had many conversations with my son about this. Is the values of the organization matter? Like if you feel I could never work for company X, right? Then don't. Like unless you're like again, unless you have to feed your family, there's that line. There's the line of all right, you know what? I have to do what I have to do, right? But to the extent you can avoid that and align your values with that company. Back when I was at Bridgewater Associates, that was their interviewing style. Didn't care about skill. Skill wasn't a factor. It was values, abilities. The hierarchy was values, abilities, and skills. That was literally the way we would interview. And they're a pretty tough place to interview at. And they've got a very colorful story. But the reality is, aligning on values first is the most important thing. And you can do that before you even interview. Like you can look at the company, look at the press releases, get a deep understanding of what the company stands for,
Yeah.
and that matters to me. And I know, like I said, your generation as well, it matters a lot. Some people, again, it's like and I say this without judgment, I want to make money, so I want to work on Wall Street, like, and or I want to do, want to work in crypto, or I want to work on this or that, like, and if that's your end goal, who am I to judge? Like that's your call. If that's what you want to do at this point in your life. In fact, the example that I can't remember the article. This woman was just absolute rock star, like rainmaker, and I don't even remember the asset class she was working in, but she made a boatload of money, extremely successful, hated her job, made a ton of money, such that she could use that giant pile of money to do social good. So it was
Yeah.
kind of like this, that was the trade. And that goes back to the triangle conversation of earlier.
Yeah.
But I think the first and foremost align with values. And that's when we would interview, like, you can't be like, all right, what are your values, Sage? Like, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Value food. That's
I
my main.
value getting this job.
Yeah, really value, being able to afford things, clothing,
Yeah.
music. But,
Yeah.
then it goes to abilities, and abilities are things that like people take for granted, like your ability to communicate, your ability to be a logical thinker, or to be an analytic, or like I said, the communicator piece is huge. There's a lot of public speaking. There's a lot of things that you can get better at over time if you spend a lot of time and energy working on, but it's really hard to materially move the needle. Like
Yeah.
honestly, like that's not something you just get. You just don't, like, and it's not like you have it or you don't. You can cultivate it. You grew up with it from how you were raised, your parents, your schooling, your whole you get to that
Yeah.
point, the things that make you, right. And I've not put a lot of value on the skill itself, because if you've got the value, one of the things I value is creativity, a curious mind. You're a fast learner. If you've got the core
Right.
programming skills, you can pick up, you can go from R to, I don't know, whatever, StatLab, whatever
Yeah. Python, whatever.
Python, or, I don't even know I don't even know half the cool ones now, honestly. Yeah, Python's great. But I guess the takeaway here is, like, if you're aligned on the company, then that's a good targeting place,
Yeah.
and you should use that as a way to communicate. Like, very very tactical question: when you submit your resume, did you put a cover letter in there as well?
Yeah. I always do a cover letter.
And what is the main purpose of your cover letter? This isn't a quiz. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I would say at this point it's to try to. I haven't really. I think the distinguishing abilities. I've been thinking about values and skills, but I haven't. And I think actually what I've been trying to do is articulate abilities, but I haven't thought of it in that way, as like more of those kind of like almost personality,
Yeah,
characteristics, just like who you are. That's how you hold yourself. But that's kind of what I try to focus on more. Like the resume's got all the skills, all the detail, and it's just like telling you the facts of what I've accomplished, and there you go. But trying to definitely focus on the values and mission. It's certainly much easier to write if I'm actually like interested or excited about what they do. And there's certain places you're like, wow, this is such a cool company, like, and you genuinely would like love to work there. You want to really, and so those kind of are easy because you just can speak right to the values. But then trying to just like synthesize, like almost at that level of those functional roles I was talking about before, of like communication and
sure.
just kind of like trying to just get across like what's the big picture of like who I am. But it's definitely I really, it's either a challenging exercise in some extent or super easy, and usually what distinguishes that is whether I'm there's values alignment and I'm genuinely just like interested in like what they do.
So you're a data guy. What's your hit rate been when you did the latter versus the former?
The latter, as in,
As in targeting it more, like a lot, like when you're excited, when you're more values driven,
yeah.
when you wrote the covering letter, more with that lens. Does it better? Or did
Oh
it
yeah. I
matter?
mean, I think it's just, it's like there's nothing when you're just kind of like trying to put into words, what you've done, and it's sort of
What I
like,
meant hit rate is literally like a follow up from the recruiter, or from the, like to get to the
yeah.
next
I
one.
mean, I don't think if I didn't have like a vision, if I didn't have that kind of like, all right, I get this and I'm excited about this, I don't think I've heard back. I think that's a necessary requirement to
Yeah,
even
that's right. And I think
get
you need
through.
to look at it from the two lenses as well on this one, because you've got the I like you, like we align, our values align, but like you've got to also have the other part where the person reading this, assuming it's a person. Makes it harder, right? But the person reviewing it, the hiring manager, whoever gets to the CV, right? You've hit the thing that they care about,
Yeah.
right? And finding out that thing is tough. Like I'm not gonna,
Yeah.
because like you said, if the job spec's not great, then it's,
Yeah.
but that's
When
where
I've
you're,
talked to people, then even if they just like sort of work, somewhere in the company or just know of it or something like that, um, you're like actually excited to write the cover letter because you're like, finally I can write a cover letter that I actually know what the person on the other side is actually hoping I talk about, rather than sort of, because the decoding thing, you just end up writing like this weird cryptic thing. As much as you're trying to, they're reading it and they're like, this guy doesn't know anything about what we do, but you just like, I couldn't figure it out.
yeah.
It was a lot of stuff on there. I don't really know what what this job is. It's very vague.
But then that's where you come back to like I align on your values and I'm not entirely sure about the role, but here's
Right.
what I'm excited about and here's things I've done that I'm excited about. Like what all through our conversation, right? What I've heard from you is this inquiry. You've got a very curious mind. The social not justice, but the social good
Like
aspect of
impact. Yeah.
impact, that's the word. Thank you. Is super important. And like again, that's another branch point in your tree, right? Do you want to stay do you want to stay in that space? Do you want to go for the more traditional corporate, right? There's a bunch of branch points you can take, and be more, not if you be more focused. You send out a ton of, right? You send a ton of these, but like the initiative might be tackling it just something that's in a non-traditional way. Like there's this old school technique where if, let's say, there's a company you really want to work for, and um, you see a bunch of jobs that are lined up, right? Like I've had this happen before. I've looked at a bunch of jobs like, oh my god, that's right, that's what I want to do, but it's not at the right level.
Right.
Right. So the temptation was write a cover letter, right? That explains like, look, I'm looking for such and such a thing. I think I'm a great fit because we align on values. I've got the abilities you're looking for, and I've already done similar work, blah, blah, blah. Print it on good letterhead and like FedEx it to, find an HR person and just
Right.
FedEx it. Because they're going to open a FedEx,
Yeah.
right?
They're like,
And
what
it's
the
like an
heck is
old
this?
school technique, right? It's going to cost you $20 or 15, whatever the number is, right? Um, I don't know if it's worked, but this was back in the day we used to do these types of things, right? Because
Probably be more impactful now.
nobody gets mail.
Nobody, if
Like that's
everyone, you could just send a letter. I think you don't even need the FedEx because they'd be so
maybe not. Yeah,
excited to
like
get a
I
letter.
just like what? And now assuming they have a mailbox, right? But that's what I mean. Like I think, and the macro point I'm trying to make is you need a non-traditional approach to break through, and
Yeah.
that could be one. I mean, I don't know that I'd do that for every job because that could be exhausting. But for the ones you really care about, the ones you want to make a difference, you want to make a splash. There's that kind of creative approach. Um,
I'm well, I actually I want to go back to what you were saying too, because of before of um kind of help me triangulate this of, I've had this experience doing working at a smaller startup and sort of getting to have more leadership experience and more things, but also, like you said, at larger organizations, then especially in certain like technical roles, they're really looking, it's very well defined. They just want to see, do you have that track record?
yep,
And, I would say on my end, when I've applied the jobs that are in marketing or more just data analytics, it's easy for me to retailer it to show that track record and,
sure,
capture that. But then generally like the roles, they call for more things, and so it's like, I think my question is
yeah.
both on the one hand, i'm um I'm not like worried about working at a job that doesn't have impact or something like that, because I think in my own network and career, like I figured out how I can do that on my own. I don't rely on that a job.
And that's
But
a key. That's a
yeah,
key learning, right? Like, so that's good. You made a decision, right? It's your, and that's
yeah.
a personal decision. So that's a good thing.
And so with that in mind, there's actually probably similar to the story you shared, like a lot of advantage in my mind of working at a large organization, working corporate, compensation, but just also experience and getting to see, how these things all come together at, those levels. But I also think like where I'm sitting right now, I don't have that track record of like I've been doing project management, or I've been doing XYZ. Just that's like my focus. And a
Sure.
lot of these jobs, especially data science stuff like that, they're looking for that person, that data science. Just I've been doing software engineering, and so I'm not a software engineer. I'm not that. I'm more at the strategic level of data and analytics, storytelling, stakeholder. You got to find a way to like, well, why does this matter? Not just like, run a model and never talk to anybody kind of thing.
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
And
You
so
want. Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out like, how do I, because I think you said something really key about um, separating into buckets and kind of like, how do I represent that? So I don't want to look like a jack of all trades, master of none. To some of these places, but I also can recognize like you start going down one of these paths and all of a sudden, you
That's your
like
career.
there's like certain areas where I'd be like, you know what, I would be happy to narrow into some of these areas,
Yeah.
around product management, some of the kind of like strategic data science, all that would be great. Like I'd be happy with that.
And they're very, but to be clear, right? That like if I look at those three roles, program management, product management, and then data science. And data science is too squishy to call it that.
Yeah.
But let's say it's analyst, right? You're either
Right.
building models, you're interpreting models, you're processing data. You're the bridge between maybe, again, it doesn't require full on suite experience, but like again, depending on the org. But those three roles are very different, right?
Exactly.
And they'll have different job requirements and different specs and whatnot. And how you position one to the other is will be the difference between you getting the interview and not, right? Because like it feels very much like you're at the front door, like that. Like, how do I say this? A lot of the way I've always thought about recruiting, well, like from the hiring manager side, is look, it's a pipeline. I've got a number of roles, that I'm looking to fill. In the case of like my Nomura examples, we had a lot of roles to fill. We had business analysts, we had report writers. This is back, back you needed a tool. We had data people, et cetera, right? So it was a big project, multi-year thing, and we were hiring mostly consultants, right? Because we knew it was going to end at some point. And it was very much, for me, it's always culture fit is first. You got to work with the team, right? So that was always part of my interview style. But like after that, do you have the requisite skills or abilities to do the job, right? And for consultants, it's very different, right? If you're looking for a consultant, it's very much the skill. You're hired
Yeah.
done. Still have to fit in, and I'm just going to pause myself there because that is something that honestly, like I wish I had done consulting sooner in my career. I did it sort of later in my lifestyle, and it took a toll on my family. I was traveling a ton, but I learned so much in such a compressed period of time. It's not for everyone, right? I mean, it's a great way to develop a drinking problem. I know that, but it's a team sport. You build camaraderie. You learn a ton in a very compressed amount of time. And then you get contacts within companies. You get contact. Your network grows much more quickly in consulting,
Right.
much more than if you hang out your own shingle and you try to do your own thing. Like if you go to a technology consulting company. The downside is the travel. If that may not be a downside. For me, it became one. I enjoyed it at
Right.
first. It's got to be too much. But going back to going back to the point you mentioned is like the profile of a mid level or senior level, this mid size or large size bank, brokerage, financial services. That's a profile that's you can apply to that class of work, whatever the title you go after. So maybe narrow down in your mind, like, what do I want to be? Do I want to be do you know the difference between those three roles as an example?
Yeah, I think that's like where I'm sitting, where I only know it in through my own experience, and I don't have enough, um, just background knowledge to really know like in a large organization, if let's say all those roles are sitting at a table, what are they contributing to that meeting? I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know that clarity.
That's a loaded question because sometimes if you're the other person, like you're a program manager and there's a product manager opining about user journeys, you're like, oh my God, stop already. When are we going to start doing the work? Right.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then there's the software engineer going, you guys, when are we going to start doing the work? Right. Like both of
yeah.
you. Enough with the work breakdown structure. Let's do the work. So it's a I mean, there's plenty of resources on LinkedIn, and a lot of people will tell you what it means to be a product manager. I'm actually going through the shift now myself. I've been a program manager, but the thing is, like, I've built products my whole career. It's always been about building things, but I've never had the product manager discipline in my background. Right. So it is a discipline like program manager. Like there's the PM BOK, there's the, PM program management book of knowledge, there's the PMI, there's all sorts of, certifications and courseware to go down that track, right? The
Yeah.
project program management track, which is different than the product management track. But at the end of the day, product managers will, in my simple view, product managers own a thing for its lifetime.
Hmm.
Right. So they start from, sometimes if you're lucky, from inception, because then it's really your baby, all the way through, cradle to grave, as they say. But usually what it is if your product is successful, you'll continue to iterate on it. Like, and again,
Yeah.
with a big company, you might be working on a feature set or, a part of that product. And your measure of success is, how do I grow that product's adoption or that feature's adoption? Right. Which is
Right.
different than the program manager who might be working on a part of the execution of building that product. Right, which is very different than the analyst who's in the deets of a specific feature or capability, et cetera. Right. So I like to think about, where do I get my energy from? What are the things I like to do?
Hmm.
And if the answer really, Sage, if the answer is all of them, startup is a good place.
Hmm.
But if it's like, okay, but there's risk and reward with these things, like the startup culture today is very different than what it used to be. Like, I
Yeah.
would make
Yeah.
millions and I made thousands, and it wasn't quite how I was expecting it to play out, but it was a great learning experience. And again, the other thing I'll say is, for where you are in your career journey, sometimes you got to take that stepping stone to
Yeah.
be like, all right, this job may not pay what I want it to pay, but it's got the title or the experience or the cachet of the company, that
Yeah.
I'll take something that may not be exactly what I want to do to get in the door. And then just
Yeah.
have to potentially, like, work your tail off for the first couple of years, suck it up, as we say. Which again, like, if you go to a company that you're aligned with the culture, like, people don't leave jobs because of generally because of the work that they're doing. Right? I think it's like 60+% is the manager, right? And your manager will drive whether you stay or you go. The work is certainly important, but a lot of it is the company's values, the manager, right? And then the work itself. If it's something you're getting energy from or you're doing, it may not be enough. That's on you then. How do you make it more so that you stand out, or that hey, this project could take two
Yeah.
weeks. You did it in an afternoon. Like, oh my God, we got to give Sage more stuff to do.
Well, what I've taken away is that I've in my resume for the um, research application that we developed, there I've described it, in 100 ways, but like led to development. So that's like the generic version of it. But actually, it's product management. That's what I was doing. It was totally cradle to grave. I mean, not grave. We're in adolescence now,
Yeah, yeah.
um,
Cradle.
but it's
That'd be a good way to phrase it too, right?
yeah,
Cradle adolescence.
yeah.
That's different than what other people would say.
Yeah, yeah. And so it's like you know, it certainly feels like it could be project management in different ways. I mean, I was sort of but it was product management in that I was working with a third-party development team. They had a project manager leading to help them organize all the Jira tickets and just, keep us as our interface together.
Yep.
But, I was really in charge of like, what does this actually need to do? The product need to do? Who are we serving? Getting all the information, checking things with the actual potential clients and users and all this. And then through that team working together with their project manager, we have, had a back end software engineer, had UX specialists, quality assurance testers. And so you're um but what the project manager was doing on their team was definitely much more of like, okay, we're going to work on this week, we're going to do this, and
Yeah.
like I was involved in that as well, but as much as more like, what is the strategic priority? Like, what does this product need? If we have to make a choice between what gets released this release or next release, they couldn't answer that question because they don't have that strategic insight. And So, that's clarifying for me. And I think,
Yeah, that's very much like what you just described is what's the roadmap, how we're going to sequence things, and maybe it's not a formal roadmap, but yeah, that's product management.
yeah. And so, and like, that's been, like, I definitely love that experience. And I also think, so if I kind of step back and say, all right, for some of these large organizations, corporate, more well-defined roles, things like analyst or product management, of those three, let's just say,
Yeah,
are things that I can speak to in more of a, I mean, even the story I was talking about, the predictive model. I mean, in
yeah,
some ways that was product management, and it's a different context, but the whole idea um, of what we were developing. And then on the other hand, I actually think it's really clarifying for me to say, like, look, I have a lot of this experience because I've been working at kind of startup environments,
yeah,
and there's plenty of startups out there. And guess what? When I read their job descriptions, they fit a lot more like my kind of broad ones, where I'm like, actually, I can, so much of what I've done, I can throw in here, throw in here. And it actually, they're not looking for something super pinned down, because they're like, we're just starting up. Come in here and you figure out what you should do,
yeah.
kind of
You might
thing.
have to do some sales too.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to
Yeah,
figure it out together. We don't know.
yeah,
How could we know?
yeah. It's a different. It's a different. I love the startup. What brought me back to technology, because my career trajectory was startups. I started in startups. I mean, I worked. My first company was a bigger software company, but it was like big software company to a bunch of little startups. Took two of them public, or one to a sale, one to public, and loved it. And then went into financial services and consulting, et cetera. But when I look back over my career, I was like, I had the most fun at, again, software companies. My I tried a startup on coming back. I was like, oof, no, this wasn't a good match.
Yeah.
But that
Well,
was
you've
with
gone
lessons.
you've gone around the block to me too many
Yeah,
times to.
like and my risk tolerance is different now. Like, if I was to do a startup today, it would be my own startup, or
Yeah.
I do with a bunch of people that I know. He can sell, she can manage. We've got then I like, because then you'd have your team. And right now I'm just having fun at my regular job and doing podcasting. So,
Yeah, yeah.
so in the little time we have remaining, like, is there anything you want to close on? Any thoughts? Anything you want to share?
I mean, I think I'm curious, just from your own experience, just because I think it's actually, um, would be really enlightening, just sort of from your own journey in terms of like, help me decode some of these roles, because even just those I just threw those three out there, but from maybe what you've heard about what I've done, and sort of like, um, as you've gone through your career, you can kind of see that more senior view, like where I'm sitting now with this, I have a variety of things I can kind of go. There's sort of some branches, can also
Sure.
lean into certain channels. What do you think? What would your advice be, especially in like the technology startup space, and just sort of like where things are at these days? It's changing so much. So I would love
That's
that kind of insight.
Yeah, that's very true. I would say, if I were you, I would take two tracks. I would pick the discipline, and I think you and I both, this last hour, we kind of landed on the product space, which I think is something that feels right from. Again, I'm going to make a huge career defining judgment on 1 hour of talking with you, so let's be clear about that. No, but like, it feels to me like this is what you're looking for. Like, this is the way you get your energy from. I particularly like the point you brought up around, like, hey, and then we can try this, and we can, the notion of maybe, creatively solving a new problem with software is product management, right?
Right.
The design, the direction, that's very much that space. The next question then to ask, if you think that's correct, would be startup or bigger company, right? And the startup, you'll do more. Like we just talked about, you'll do a lot more than just the product management piece, um, versus coming in at more of an entry level, or you've had the title of sorts, or you've at least had the role at at a at your current company, right? That's not necessarily a commercial, like a commercial operation. Why can't I say public sector? Like, I don't know what's wrong with me, but like like that, that charitable venture,
Right.
right, is very different than the corporate world. as perceived by the interviewer. Like it's the same, you're still doing the work, right? So
Yeah.
your trick will be pitching yourself as, I can transfer this skill set that I've got and more. Because not only do I do the product stuff, but I also have the pitch side of that. Would certainly rephrase that is the pitch side is definitely much the product world, right?
Yeah.
But there's also the marketing, which is, and again, a big company less, but you can spin it, right? Telling the story is one of the things you open with, and I would continue to like really hammer home, because ultimately that's what selling anything is. It's like making people understand the value of
Right.
the widget or the thing you're building, right? So I would take two tracks and just check out both of them like that, if you, because
Hmm.
that'll obviously it'll help you narrow your search a bit, right, which is always helpful, but it'll give you a different lens by which to look, because there's plenty of
Yeah.
people on LinkedIn that are willing to tell you all about how great it is to be a product manager and what good
Yeah.
looks like and everything else.
Yeah, so it's to play that back, it feels like, um, we could say product management as you could swap in one of these couple other areas that I would be happy to dive in, but to a more established company, the angle is on the one hand actually really trying to emphasize clearly like what that particular role is, knowing that it is probably really well defined, and
Yep.
then instead using the variety of experience as like, look, this gives me a little bit of an angle, helps me interpret when we are working with the marketing or sales teams, like we actually can understand where they're coming from and
Yep.
the relationship between the two. um, and then on the other hand, for more of like a startup organization, then I think my existing kind of resume then can speak directly to that, and actually making use of the variety and saying, look, I'm comfortable doing a sales, doing a pitch, doing that kind of business development, as much as then taking that back to the product management, taking that back to the analysis. So it's like, um and I think a lot of, especially you can tell from some of the job descriptions when they don't exactly know what they need, but they kind of want someone who's like, probably you'll do this, but
Yeah, that
if
might
you
change.
can do these things too, then great. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think I wouldn't over index on the resume as much. Like I know it feels like that's the hurdle. And yes, that's an important piece. Once you get your story down, your personal story down, I think it's a way to communicate what you're telling.
hmm
And there are people who can help you craft the perfect resume, and I don't think there's such a thing as a perfect resume, but like you can, a lot of times when people try to, and I'm very guilty of this, it's like I vomited all my experience all over a sheet of paper, right? And it's like, eh, there is such thing as less is more. And I'm not saying that's in your case. I can say it is in mine. I'm like, once I realize I'm using an 8-point font, I'm like, maybe I'm putting in too much.
yeah,
Got a
exactly.
little too much crap in there. So it becomes more of how do I tell a story, especially when you've been working as long as me. Like, how do you tell a story with a lot less? So anyway,
That's helpful actually, and just helps you think about like what is the point of these? Are all just formalities, but like, can you
look,
get it across?
in its most simple terms, the purpose of the resume is to get to an interview, right? And usually the first step will be a phone interview or a GBC, right? Then the next step is to get to decision maker or management. That might be a bunch of them. There might be a panel along the way, but at the end of the day, you've got to get down to the decision maker and whether or not they, like if they're going to be like your team lead or whatever. That's that getting to that level, right? And then it's getting the offer, negotiating the offer, and then getting hired. It's a pipeline. I think I mentioned this earlier. I don't think I explained the details, but like I've always thought of it that way, and that's whether you're hiring or you're being
Right.
hired. And
Yeah.
the goal right now is to get the interview.
Yeah.
But
100%.
goal zero is, goal zero is find the right organization you want to work for. Since you kind of narrowed down the role,
Yeah.
right? Then it becomes okay. Now that I've got to focus on the role. Who do I start? Harassing for the interview.
Yeah. 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 I think this is helpful to because I've been reforming my angle more depending on what's out there, which is fine, and definitely early enough in my experience where I could do that.
Oh, absolutely.
But also like trying to think like, all right, let me have like I have my a really strong story to tell about this kind of role, and let me actually go look for places that
Right.
I can tell that story too. Is a different.
I
Yeah.
think that's good. Well, great. Well, thank you for working with me today. This is a wonderful conversation. I'm glad.
Yeah.
I think we both got something out of this. And once again, I appreciate you taking the time. I'm going to hit Stop now. Got to remember to stop saying that.